Good morning, students. Today I would discuss with you Strong Roots by APJ Abdul Kalam. You know, this is in your class 12 syllabus, and APJ Abdul Kalam is a very famous name who needs no introduction from my end. All of you know that he was one of the greatest scientists turned politician. Though he was not a politician in that sense, he was an apolitical personality in that respect. In spite of that, he became one of the most illustrious presidents of India. He is one of the best books, Wings of Fire. It is actually his autobiography, and the extract that is in our syllabus, that is Strong Roots, has been taken from his autobiography, which we call Wings of Fire. So today I would discuss with you Strong Roots. I was born into a middle-class Tamil family in the island town of Rameswaram in the erstwhile Madras state. My father, Joinulabdin, had neither much formal education nor much wealth. Despite these disadvantages, he possessed great innate wisdom and a true generosity of spirit. He had an ideal helpmate in my mother, Asiyamma. I do not recall the exact number of people she fed every day, but I am quite certain that far more outsiders ate with us than all the members of our own family put together. So in the very first paragraph, he has drawn a picture of his own childhood. He was born into a middle-class Tamil family. So he was a citizen of Tamil Nadu, which was Madras. At that time, it was Madras. The name of the state was Madras. It was erstwhile Madras. Erstwhile means at that time it was there. In the island town of Rameswaram. Rameswaram is a very famous place of pilgrimage. The island town Rameswaram was the hometown of APJ Abdul Kalam. His father was Joinulabdin, and he had neither much formal education nor much wealth. So he was not formally educated in that sense. He didn't have much formal education. In spite of that, he was a very knowledgeable person. He was a sagacious person, a very wise person. And he possessed great innate wisdom. The wisdom that was innate. Innate means inborn. He had inborn wisdom. He did not get the wisdom from the books. It was no bookish knowledge. It was no bookish wisdom that he was equipped with. Rather, he was equipped with innate wisdom. I mean the inborn wisdom. A very true generosity of spirit. And he had true generosity of spirit. Generosity means nobility. He had nobility of spirit. He was a very, lofty-hearted man. He had a very lofty personality, and he was very kind, soft-hearted man. He had an ideal helpmate in my mother, Asiyamma. So they were a very, ideal couple, Abdul Kalam's father and his mother. They two made an ideal couple, and his mother's name was Asiyamma. I do not recall the exact number of people she fed every day, but I am quite certain that far more outsiders ate with us than all the members of our own family put together. So this particular incident shows us what a great mentality Abdul Kalam's mother had. Abdul Kalam's mother, APJ Abdul Kalam's mother, Asiyamma, she was also a very generous lady. She wanted also she liked to feed many people, even those who were not the family members of hers. In spite of that, she always fed them, or she used to feed them. So these things contributed to the making of the psychological structure that APJ Abdul Kalam had actually. These things always made the background of APJ Abdul Kalam, and APJ Abdul Kalam got a very generous background, a very psychologically generous background from his parents. My parents were widely regarded as an ideal couple. My mother's lineage was the more distinguished, or one of her forebears having been bestowed the title of Bahadur by the British. So, mother's lineage was a bit more distinguished than the father's, because one of her mother's forebears means the people who were there, before the birth of her mother. So one of her forebears having been bestowed the title of Bahadur by the British. The British government gave the title Bahadur. Actually, Bahadur is a very prestigious title, and this title is generally rewarded to the very eminent persons, very eminent personalities. And Abdul Kalam's, one of his Abdul Kalam's, mother's relative, got the Bahadur title from the British government. I was one of many children, a short boy with rather undistinguished looks, born to tall and handsome parents. We lived in our ancestral house, which was built in the middle of the 19th century. It was a fairly large Pakka house made of limestone and brick. On the Mosque Street in Rameshwaram, my austere father used to avoid all inessential comforts and luxuries. However, all necessities were provided for in terms of food, medicine, or clothing. In fact, I would say mine was a very secure childhood, materially and emotionally. APJ Abdul Kalam, has delineated here, has drawn here a very true pain picture of his own childhood. The childhood was a very secure one. The childhood was very secure one, both from the points of view, material and emotional. From emotional point of view and from material point of view, from both the points of view, his childhood was a very secure childhood. It was a very secure childhood. Secure childhood is very important for the psychological evolution of a child. If a child does not get a secure childhood, if a child always sees his parents quarreling with one another, so naturally he will be mentally distorted, he will be mentally disbalanced. But APJ Abdul Kalam's childhood was far from being as such. His childhood was a very secure childhood, both emotionally and materially. They were not rich. They were not rich. In spite of that, his father did not hesitate to provide them all the essential things, essential comforts. He didn't hesitate to provide, clear. But his father and mother, as they were very much in consonance with one another, so naturally it's a very emotional, it was a very emotional, emotionally very strengthened background that he got. It was a large, fairly large Pakka house. Actually, he has here given the description of his house, the house that he lived. The house was, it's a Pakka house, it's a concrete made house, Pakka house, and it was situated in the Mosque Street in the Rameshwaram. It was made of limestone. Limestone, it was in the vogue at that time. My austere father used to avoid all inessential comforts. His father was austere. Austere means actually he always used to avoid all inessential comforts. Inessential comforts, plain living and high thinking was the motto of his life. It was the ideology, it was the principle that he used to follow in his life. Plain living and high thinking. It was very important for his father. And plain living, as he was a firm believer, a staunch believer of this philosophy, naturally he avoided all inessential comforts. All inessential comforts. Only those comforts were mitigated, only those comforts were inculcated, which were very much important. Apart from the important comforts, he did not imbibe or did not embrace the comforts. He always shunned all the inessential comforts. I normally ate with my mother sitting on the floor of the kitchen. She would place a banana leaf before me, on which she then ladled rice and aromatic samba, a variety of sharp homemade pickle, and a dollop of fresh coconut chutney. So this is a very true picture of how she spent the food time with his mother. It was totally devoid of all sorts of luxuries in that sense, because he didn't have any dining table in his house. Rather, he used to sit on the floor of the kitchen with his mother, and he took his breakfast, dinner, whatever. And the menu that was served by his mother was not a very luxurious menu in that sense. Rather, it's a very commonplace menu, a menu which is very commonplace in southern part of our country, South India. Ladled rice and aromatic samba, a variety of sharp homemade pickles. The southern people, South Indian people, they are very much fond of pickles. and fresh coconut chutney. The Shiva temple, which made Rameswaram so famous to pilgrims, was about a 10-minute walk from our house. Our locality was predominantly Muslim, but there were quite a lot of Hindu families too, living amicably. That's very important, living amicably with their Muslim neighbors. So not only good parents, rather a very good locality, it also contributed a lot to the making of APJ Abdul Kalam. Clear? So the locality to which he belonged, or the locality to which the family of Abdul Kalam belonged, was an example of communal harmony. It's an example, an instance of communal harmony. The place was predominantly lived by the Muslim people, but in spite of that, there were some Hindu families too. They were also living, and they were living amicably. They had no enmity, they had no animosity between themselves or among themselves. They had no animosity in between. Rather, they were in consonance with one another, and they had a very friendly attitude with one another. There was a very old mosque in our locality where my father would take me for evening prayers. I had not the faintest idea of the meaning of the Arabic prayers chanted, but I was totally convinced that they reached God. It's very important. Actually, which language did God know, or which language does God know? It's the question of debate. Actually, all the people across the globe pray to God. But which language does God himself know? That's the very good debated question. Actually, if we think deeper, there is no debate, because God needs no language to understand what we pray for, or he knows every language. Therefore, APJ Abdul Kalam, whenever he went to the mosque for doing the evening prayer, namaz, when he went there, he had no idea, he had faintest idea, means practically he had no idea about the Arabic language or the meaning of the Arabic language. La ilaha illallah, the way the namaz is chanted, he had no idea about that. In spite of that, he knew that whatever he was chanting, what kind of prayer he was doing in front of God, it was reaching God straight. He was totally convinced of the fact. So it was a kind of moral connection, it was a kind of spiritual connection that he is referring to. Many of them offered, when my father came out of the mosque after the prayers, people of different religions would be sitting outside waiting for him. Many of them offered bowls of water to my father, who would dip his fingertips in them and say a prayer. This water was then carried home for invalids. I also remember people visiting our home to offer thanks after being cured. Father always smiled and asked them to thank Allah, the Merciful. Many people were there, probably a bit superstitious in that sense. People were there and they believed that if APJ Abdul Kalam's father would dip his finger into the water that they had with them in a bowl, and if that water was sprinkled on the people who were invalid, handicapped, diseased, suffering from different sorts of ailments and different sorts of physical complications and health hazards, they would be cured. It was a belief that they had, and miraculously, magically, or for any scientific reason I don't know, somehow those people or some of those people got cured. And when they cured, or when they came round, they came, or their relatives came to thank APJ Abdul Kalam's father that it is for your spiritual influence, the ailment was gone, and the ailing person, the invalid person has come round. So naturally he should be thanked for that. But one thing is very important here. APJ Abdul Kalam's father did not claim anything from them. Rather, he told them to thank God the Merciful, because it's not the magic of any mortal man. Rather, it is the magic of Allah the Merciful. Allah the Merciful means the omnipotent God, all-powerful God, omniscient God, merciful God, because he has the absolute authority over all these things. Actually, whatever good or bad is being performed, whatever is being performed, whatever is being done, is done under the auspices of that merciful God. So let he be praised. Let him be praised. Let him be praised because he is worthy of being praised, not Abdul Kalam's father. So here, a kind of self-abnegation is important. Self-abnegation is prominent. He does not want to claim any sort of, he does not want to convey that he is the instrumental figure. He is the instrumental figure behind this magical coming round. No. The high priest of Rameswaram temple, Pakhi Lakshman Shastri, was a very close friend of my father's. One of the most vivid memories of my early childhood is of the two men, each in traditional attire, discussing spiritual matters. When I was old enough to ask questions, I asked my father about the relevance of prayer. My father told me there was nothing mysterious about prayer. Rather, prayer made possible a communion of the spirit between people. When you pray, he said, you transcend your body and become a part of the cosmos, which knows no division of wealth, age, caste, or creed. One of the most profound stanzas, this stanza in particular, this stanza under consideration is one of the most profound stanzas in terms of its relevance, in terms of its implication and inner meaning. The high priest of Rameswaram temple, Pakhi Lakshman Shastri, was a very close friend of my father's. High priest of Rameswaram temple. Rameswaram temple is a Shiva temple. It is a temple of the Hindus, and Pakhi Lakshman Shastri was the loftiest position holder in that sense. And Pakhi Lakshman Shastri was a very close friend of Jainul Abidin. So you can very easily understand that Pakhi Lakshman Shastri was Hindu and Jainul Abidin was Muslim. In spite of being Hindu, in spite of being Muslim, in spite of all the religious dichotomies, religious discrepancies and disparities, they had no problem of becoming friends. The religious gap, the religious hiatus does not pose any hindrance in the path of being friends. True friendship goes beyond all sorts of religious complications and hazards, because psychologically, morally and spiritually they were standing on the same foothold. Psychologically, morally and spiritually. And when it happens, all other things are nothing but unnecessary secondary details. The high priest of Rameswaram temple, Pakhi Lakshman Shastri, was a very close friend of my father. One of the most vivid memories of my early childhood is of two men, each in traditional attire, discussing spiritual matters. They were discussing spiritual matters in traditional attire. Traditional attire, that's very important. Jainul Abidin put on a Muslim attire. Pakhi Lakshman Shastri put on or donned his own Brahmin attire. They didn't have to set aside that issue. Rather, they put on their own traditional attire, but there was a difference in the outward dress. In terms of outward dress, in terms of exterior, there was difference. But in terms of interior, there was no difference. In terms of interior, there was no difference because they were discussing about some high spiritual matter. They were discussing about some lofty spiritual concepts and ideas. And spiritual concepts and spiritual ideas has no connection, in that sense, practically has no connection with exterior dress, exterior formalities. No, there was no connection in between. When I was old enough to ask question, I asked my father about the relevance of prayer. It's very important. When APJ Abdul Kalam became of that age in which he could ask question to his father, he asked a very important question. What's the relevance of prayer? Why will you do prayer? Or why do you do prayer? What's the relevance of it? What's the significance of it? uh, my father told there was nothing mysterious about prayer. There was nothing mysterious about it. It's a very scientific explanation. There was nothing mysterious about it. There are so many people, especially in our country, there are so many people who think different, who think that, prayer has some sort of mysterious, magical associations. If we do prayer, then some magical solution will come. These things we have in our mind, but APJ Abdul Kalam's father categorically said that there is nothing mysterious about prayer. Rather, prayer, he said, prayer made possible a communion of the spirit between people. So what's the efficacy of prayer? The efficacy of prayer is that whenever you are doing a prayer, or whenever we pray, there a communion or a connection is made, a connection is set up among people. Whenever you are praying, especially for others, generally we pray for ourselves and for others. Generally we pray for ourselves only, not for others. But if we become a bit sublimated, if we become a bit elevated in our concepts and ideas, so at that time we would pray both for ourselves, for the well-being of ourselves, and not only for the well-being of ourselves, rather for the well-being of others too. At that time, we must be taking into consideration the griefs, the pangs, the worries, the tensions, the anxieties that the people generally suffer from. So naturally at that time we become a bit selfless. Until we are selfish, we will keep praying for ourselves only, not for others. But when we become a bit selfless, what happens? We start praying for others too. We start praying for others. That's important. When you pray, he said, you transcend your body and become a part of the cosmos. What a gem idea. When you pray, when you truly pray, we transcend our body. We transcend. That means we go beyond our body. We go beyond our body means what happens? All our physical frame, physical limitations are surmounted. We generally step beyond the physical limitations and we become a part of the cosmos. We become a part of the cosmos, the cosmic consciousness. The cosmic consciousness becomes my consciousness. Microcosmic personality gets entwined with the macrocosmic entity. Microcosm and macrocosm get entwined with one another and we become one. We can feel then what oneness is. We can feel what oneness is. In our Upanishad, there is the Advaita Tattva, and we can feel what Advaita Tattva, the doctrine of non-dualism, is. When we pray, we said you transcend your body and become the part of the cosmos, which knows no division of wealth, age, caste or creed. There is no difference. There is no disparity. There is no dichotomy. There is only unity and unification and nothing else. All the physical and earthly problems, all the physical and earthly matters, whatever are there, they can't pose any hindrance in our realization of that non-dual oneness. Clear? That what our Upanishad calls Advaita Tattva. Okay, up to this today, and the next part will be discussed later. I think you will take preparation about it at your home. So keep practicing and keep taking preparation. Okay.